Welcome to PM Express Business Edition. A lot of things have happened in the economic space. One can talk about the stability of the Ghana cedi, energy sector debts, the almighty 1 Ghana cedi on a litre of petroleum product, increasing the amount that you are likely to pay to 1 Ghana cedi 95 pesos. And also the issue about the labor front. The registered nurses are likely to call up their strike, but some would say that it might not be the last. How is government working to manage the wage bill and the pressures from organized labor? It is the Ghana cedi, it is the energy sector debt, and also managing the wage bill in terms of demand from organized labor. And indeed, I will say that I am grateful to have the person who speaks to the president's ear. He is the economic advisor to President John Mahama. Honorable Cedi, the former Minister of Finance, in studio with me for us to discuss these issues and other developments in the economy here on PM Express Business Edition. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome to PM Express Business Edition. We are talking about the Ghana cedi stability. We're talking about the energy sector debt and also managing the wage bill as a government. We've had the concerns expressed by the registered nurses with respect to their conditions of service. We know that that might not be the last, even though information we are picking is that they could likely call off the strike within the coming days as well. But how do you manage these concerns, the pressures in a program where you're trying to enforce a fiscal consolidation program as a government? And today we have the person who speaks directly to the ear of President John Mahama. He's Mr. Cedi. He is the economic advisor to President John Mahama. But before we get into the discussion with him, let's pull out some data. Let's look at the Ghana cedi as well and how it's fared so far. We're looking at how it started in somewhere around July. You could see 2024. Let's fast forward that to January this year, to March, and then to May. We were doing somewhere around 10 Ghana cedis, 2 pesos, if you could say that. And have we got into the end of the road? That is something I'll be getting from the finance minister as well. And also the 1 Ghana cedi on a litre of petroleum product. Some are saying that there's already a 95 pesos on the litre that you're paying. So this will wrap it up to 1 Ghana cedi, 95 pesos. The argument is that from the Chamber of Oil Marketing Companies, they are arguing that it will result in an average price of 13 Ghana cedis from the current 11 Ghana cedis. Well, government is insisting that that would not be the case. Well, you will see that whose word will we take us. So if you look at the restructured energy sector levy and what is given to government, you could see the numbers there in terms of what it will resolve in a litre of petroleum product and what is actually going to bring. So what you're likely to pay on each litre of diesel and also that of petrol, some will call it super as well. We could see the prices going down, and some have said that we're actually on the verge of even getting to 10 Ghana cedi or even 9 Ghana cedi to a litre of prices of petroleum products. But this levy could actually turn things up. So saving the power sector, what are the options? What are some of the things that the analysts have said? Some have said that you have to increase utility tariffs, but the argument that I actually picked from industry was that that could have resulted in tariffs going up by more than 30%, and that was a real risk for a government to go that way. They thought that the 1 cedi levy on each litre of petroleum product could be a more good thing to do. Also following on the finance ministry to see whether they have a lot of money in the bag to save this. So what was the proposed amendment trying to do? Support the energy sector, the shortfalls in terms of financing liquid fuel, and also trying to deal with the debt as well. Reducing the legacy debts, and I'll be asking the minister, the advisor, about what is it about this legacy debt that we cannot get around it, and also stabilizing the power sector as well. And looking at the energy sector shortfall payment, you look at it, in 2024, we had about $1.4 billion US, and in 2025, it has shot up to $2.23 billion. Or looking at so energy sector shortfall payment, the big risk ahead in 2023 to 2026, looking at somewhere around $8.94 billion. And of course, there's this bit about the legacy debt too that we have to deal with, somewhere around $3.1 billion. And how do you deal with this legacy debt as manager of the economy? And also, let's come back to the issue about the labor front as well, and how this compensation for the employers, you see 2024, 2025, the amount there, and then in 2026, the projection is that it could rise to about 14.3 billion Ghana cedis. How do you deal with the issues about the ghost names, and how do you manage this pressure from organized the health sector? You could see the graduation over there in terms of annual compensation change and how it could rise. You could see about 48.5% as well. And then also the Deputy Minister of Finance saying that it could cost about 2 billion Ghana cedis if they should implement the consent of the registered nurses. Some of the members are disputing that. I'll be getting some clarity on that one. And I have with me in the studio here, economic advisor to President John Mahama Setepe. And Honorable, thank you so much for your time. How are things going? Having opportunity to always engage the president and convince him on issues about the economy. Some would say that things are quite going smooth for you. The city is stabilizing, the economy is growing, inflation is slowing down. It's quite a good time to manage in the economy, some would say.
Well, it takes hard work, it takes strategizing, and it takes learning from experience. And also learning from the hiccups that has, happened, in the last, few years, seeing an economy getting out of HIPIC, the post-HIPIC situation, HIPIC and the post-HIPIC situation, seeing some stability, indices, doing fairly well, 57% approximate debt, 6.1%, deficits, all of which unraveled, and we were talking about deficits of 12 to 13. If you add, extraordinary arrears, we were in the region of 15%, and debts coming from 57%, and if you add all the contingent liabilities and SOE debt and the rest, what you call the fiscal, quasi-fiscal, risks associated with debt, then we were almost at 100 if we had even crossed 100 in the 90s. So that's a dramatic change. And so I would think that what you are seeing now is a reversal, a gradual reversal of those trends, which I would like to remind the audience is reminiscent of the days of single spine, huge arrears, borrowing, negotiation with labor, which is also based on compensation.
We'll be coming to that big challenge, but the question was that, I mean, it is quite a good time to manage an economy when you see all these things going down. When some will say, and again, that, and I'll bring in the comment from your friends on the other side, where just 5 months into an economy or 5 months into your tenure, all these things are happening.
Yes, but if you listen carefully to the minister when he presented the budget, if you listen to His Excellency actually when he presented, his speeches and either the dialogue, Sona and others, there was always, the need to get to some traction on the short term, but the medium term was never lost. And so I just like to remind, the audience that in as much as we have had these successes, history tells us not to be complacent, and therefore you would see hints, of the structural measures. We are populating, and I'm quoting the minister in minutes, we are populating the sinking fund. We are populating the stabilization fund. We are, setting debt ceilings, debt floors, deficit ceilings, floors, which will guide, the medium term. So I don't think the narration, yes, and as much as, what is happening is something that attracts attention. I don't think the narrative has been just on, the short-term success.
So, I mean, I get you that complacency is out of your dictionary and you're still pressing ahead to improve the indicators.
It must be. It must be for domestic reasons. One, if you take the performance of the food index and the rest, you also know that you are in the rainy season, right? Where with good rains, usually the food index, falls. You also know that you are putting in a structural measure like a better handling of gold, right? And so that is boosting reserves. The medium-term perspective for these two, which I am pointing out, is that you would also, hear the presidents down, the Minister for Agriculture, and they're saying, we need to build buffers. We need to, we need to add value. We need to, which translates in the farmer services companies, services, firms which would utilize both private sector and the rest. If you listen to energy, there's talk about, ECG position now, yes, but in the medium term, PSP, bringing in private sector, so I think the conversation is not always just around, the short term. And even for gold, you would listen, to the gold board, saying that we want to add value. We want to, refine. We want to, do, bullions and others, the very things that would enhance in the medium term and, stabilize what is going on.
Honorable, let me play the devil's advocate here, and your friends at the other side would argue that what we are seeing right now raises some questions about the argument that maybe they didn't hand a bad economy to you. And if you look at the GDP estimates, even for Q1, crops growing, cocoa, and all the rest, it shows that at least, I know it to be politically suicidal for this administration to try and even give any credit to them, but the numbers are showing that at least they did something in the area of reserves of gold and the area of their policies that have helped grow their agri sector. And what we are experiencing right now, what do you say to that?
I think that it's showing that, prior to that, I think we should hesitate a bit. Of course, there could be some positives and the rest, but when you hand over, a cocoa board that, hasn't paid suppliers and you have hedged, future flows of revenues to pay for it, as, hasn't been disputed, as the current acting head of cocoa board is saying. When you take a country into default, I'm afraid, you don't say that, or to, that, we take credit, for
a completion of a debt restructuring, almost about 80% or something.
Yeah,
or 90%.
Use the word for completion. If it was that easy, why wasn't it completed? Right? If it was easy, why wasn't it completed? And then how that, excuse the language, as a sale of, gold to anybody who comes knocking. Let me tell you a quick story. I've been in Turkey, I've been other places in connection with, either the TA, which I often do, or the rest. And, I mean, everybody comes and, we hear you are the presidential advisor. We want to come and buy gold in Ghana. And I tell them, we've established a gold board. So it's not so easy as it was in the past. So you would agree, or, the past administration officials would agree, that we are doing a number of things, right? Controlling Galamsey, right? Getting the forest reserves, back gradually, and streamlining and orderly way, putting structure. Structure change is taking place. Unless you don't have any faith in, getting 3-tier regime, for buying a gold, husbanding it all within like cocoa board and marketing it in an orderly way. So the reserves is not an accidental thing, right? And where were the structures? Were the structures in place? If the structures were in place, which have been put in, if the structures that have been put in place today were in existence, then you could say we set up the structures and they are benefiting. But these are all new structures. And you're taking credit. So what is it, Yes, so
Honorable, you have been a finance minister before.
I'm not denying that certain
what can really be done in 3 months when it comes to expansion of an economy, when it comes to inflation slowing down, when it comes to enough reserves that could help in aiding investor confidence? Some would say that.
I am saying that, okay, so let me quote His Excellency recently, the leader of the whole. When he said that we want to, it was, people took management literally and said, oh, you are going to be massaging. No. When he said that we are going to, keep what is conventionally a ceiling and a floor, right, of the exchange rate, and the governor, tried to explain the same.
I'm saying that it was suicidal for the president to come out and say that he has actually...
What is wrong with setting ambitious goals?
Thrown things out of gear. Now we've seen that there's some subtle pressure on the Cedi. This should have been a market secret for the Bank of Ghana to act. The president shouldn't have come out to say that we are working with, or the Cedi will get about 10 Cedi. When in the past we go from the Bank of Ghana that if market forces are determining the rate, we are not intervening on the market.
No. Saying that market forces do not mean that you do not plan, right? And you've heard me in terms of crisis several times saying that the time to plan for crisis, right? It's not when you are in the crisis. The time to plan for crisis is when things are going well, when things are going, very well for you. In our case, commodity prices are high and whatever, you create a buffer because the crisis will come. Crises are inevitable.
And the buffers are there. But you think there was nothing wrong for the president to come out and give this market intelligence information out that we are working the Cedi to settle around 10 to 12?
Remember that His Excellency as Vice and His Excellency as President, crafted the innovative way of using oil revenues. And we use it. Didn't we use it, to pay off His Excellency Kufuor's first sovereign bond, 550 of it, and refinance from our own oil revenue? Remember, 200, million or so was used by the last administration to pay only for us to stop, and then we default. Secondly, isn't it the same president who, as vice, when the PRMA was established, I'm using the petroleum as was established, set up the stabilization fund. And we are talking about the 10th anniversary, of the Kwame Nkrumah Circle disaster, a stone throw from here, right? Do you realize that the contingency fund, which was set and put aside 2015, 2016, was the first recourse? In fact, it was the first. We went to Parliament immediately, if you recall, to ask that we take money for the contingency fund to attend to that crisis. So why did we stop? Only for Kosovo to have been, and we were caught flat-footed. That was done with one oil field. And we didn't continue with 3 oil fields. So I'm saying the president is not saying anything. He's not saying just because I have market economy and market forces, right? I must leave things to their own devices. What the president...
You think it was okay for him to have given that information out?
No, he said
that we are looking at the Cedi, the true value ending at 10 Cedis,
I'm saying,
between 10 to 12.
Let me land. And he's saying that for us to have a stable economic environment where there won't be too much price oscillation affecting importers and exporters, consumers and the rest, why don't we have a floor, a ceiling, right? And we know that as the exchange rate increases above a certain amount, it begins to wreak disaster. On the other hand, we know that as we're experiencing now, in good times, in times of good management, in terms of establishing a gold board and others, you will come to it will be declining. But then you have external factors and others. Of course, there are external factors. Favor the value of the dollar vis-a-vis gold because of tariff and other policies, and you have crude oil prices, falling. We think that we should keep, a certain floor. So what he's saying is that what is wrong with saying when we have when we are doing well and we have reserves, let's put part of the reserves aside, because one day things will change. So that when it changes, due to factors beyond our control, we can go into the reserves, right? George, let me bring this home to, to our households, right? Today, most people eat fruits. Why do we eat fruits? Isn't it because it's raining? And when you stop by the roadside and you buy the fruits, sometimes in excess, don't we come and slice it, peel it, and put it in the fridge? Right? Is preservation wrong? Right? That's an analogy. It's preservation, right, of the fruits which you would have to buy in Accra, where it's expensive when you were traveling, but keeping it, in a way in which you can, as a household, take from the fridge, and use over there, because at the price which you bought when you were traveling, in the rural areas, right? If households do this, if they manage, right, and they manage therefore how to, what is wrong with, we saying that let us have, a
floor,
and let me go to debt, so that we know that what he is saying is not just, the Minister of Finance said, we want to set a floor for debt, and we want to set a ceiling for debt. And this was something we were doing 60-65, as a ceiling, and then down 50-55. Because from experience, we know that when you are within that band, right, when you are within that band, you are likely to be B- or B+, which will affect your interest rate. And when you bring your debt below 50, 55, 50, right, like Botswana today, you are likely to be AAA rated. And therefore, if times are good and we are having reserves and, and others, what is wrong with saying that in order for the stability to continue, in order that we can get back to B-, B+, where we used to be, no junk, CCC, right? And we have the experience of using the sinking fund concept, which is in the Constitution, right? The debt repayment, if you like, we call it, concept, which is in the Constitution. Yeah. We managed to keep that between that 50, remind you, 57 is within what, 50 and 60. And therefore, we could have, with 3 oil fields, moved back to B+, but B-. But we slumped. George, we stopped. So I'm going to history for you to see that when we stopped, right, that is when we defaulted. And not like HIPIC, when foreigners bought the blank forest, we suffered haircut as Ghanaians. Isn't there some merit in his excellency saying, without thinking that he's saying we are going to massage, his excellency saying, wait a minute, we practice this, it worked for us, right? So why don't we go back, right? Because that is what countries do. Countries always keep ceilings and, ceilings and floors.
The flaws of this, someone saying that should be the function of the Bank of Ghana. I mean, now I get the impression that in terms of the Cedi stability, government is also working with, government saying that this is the floor we want, therefore, let's defend it. So I get from you that
I'm afraid
it's
no.
10, 20, and that's what the government is going to defend with the reserves.
I'm afraid no. The one who is in charge of the macro economy, who must watch indices overall, is the Minister for Finance. But we recognize the, operational, independence of the central bank. Remember, the central bank analogy applies to GRA. You are in charge of tax policy. But the reason we create an authority is that you should give the Commissioner General the powers to even ask the President, of the Republic, the highest gentleman of the land, your salary is exempted. But if you are doing farming, right, you should be paying taxes on it.
The President is into farming. Yeah.
Of course. And you know that he files his returns and everything. Yes. So what I'm saying is that let's not confuse, the framework. But by the way, that framework cannot be set without the commission, the
Bank of Ghana.
Bank of Ghana, because they
so now, but I get from you that we are working with the 10 Cedi 20 pesos. We are going to defend it.
Let me tell you the precedent. If you remember, when we set up the stabilization fund and others, There was a debate whether it should be core reserves or it should not be general reserves.
The IMF calculation and all those things as well.
Of course, we convinced the IMF that this is resources which we are going to use to manage debt and to whatever. And therefore, the compromise, instead of saying that it should be used to calculate the 3 months of import cover, which is easy to do, right? We said let it be part of the core reserve of the central bank. So we had that agreement remember we did the IMF program from Dr. Dufour, into my era, before. Yeah, so these were issues that were being debated. To the extent that during the last, when we were having our crisis, you remember the fund, it was the fund that said that you cannot add the core reserves in determining your, that is planning. That is planning to say that we want to put oil money aside for, for debt. We want to put oil money aside as buffer. Mighty US they build even in quantities. They have reserves of oil which they keep. And we started the buffer stock, with the buffer stock for oil, which is what we use to stop petrol queues, using burst tanks and the rest. So I'm afraid if you are practicing laissez-faire, economics, and you leave everything and you don't manage, laissez-faire doesn't mean that you should not.
No, but I get from you that government is going to work with the 10 Cedi 20 pesos and make sure that you defend it to be within the range of the 10, 12. That is what I get from when you talk. Yeah, we manage.
That we manage
the 10, 20 to 12.
There's nothing wrong with being defensive when you want to. So
that is what is going to happen.
When you want to stop even an own goal, you have to be defensive.
But that is what government is going to work with and defend.
I'm saying that is what we have been practicing. I'm saying that is what the countries that are doing well practice. Right? There was a time at the U.S. Treasury I asked, okay, so do you have buffers, of other foreign currency despite the U.S. dollar, being dominant? And of course, the question was, how do we manage the dollar against the yen? How do we manage the dollar against the euro?
No, but what has influenced, again, because you are close to the president's decision, and even the Minister of Finance and the Bank of Ghana governor to work with this range? Is it because you have the resources to defend this range?
No, it's economics. The answer is simple economics. The expression, and I'm sure you would have heard it, counter-cyclical policies. That's what it is. You never learn macroeconomics without, counter-cyclical, putting counter-cyclical measures. You don't manage an economy without counter-cyclical. In other words, what it is saying is that there will be cycles, right? Positive, negative, right? Which translates from your cocoa price falling because the US is soft, and your chocolate has become, there's shortage, and chocolate has become expensive, and therefore there's less consumption because they are in a slump. So chocolate is a luxury. So people move away from it when it's a slump. But that would affect your cocoa price, right? When the US is heating, right, it has an effect on chocolate. People fancy it. So what do? We go counter-cyclical to the US. When they are consuming more chocolates, and fortuitously we also have good harvest, right? We are going to get more revenue. And that is when you prepare for when the US, right, is consuming less chocolate, and therefore is affecting, the price for cocoa. So it is counter-cyclical policies.
But how did the impact on government's revenue also force government to say that, listen, even though there was an intervention and there was market forces, hey, let's work with this ban? I got information and I started to educate it that the import levy revenue was being affected. Cocoa Board was crying about their impact on export earnings. We understand that some state agencies were already getting into the red because of what is happening. Was that a major consideration when the president had to call the meeting and say that, okay, it appears that things are moving too fast for us? No. Were these things a major reason for saying that let's have a ban to work because our revenues have been affected?
Remember, even in the debates, around the 1 Cedi, levy.
We'll come to that.
Yes, we'll
but
come to that.
let's put on the currency issue.
Yes, I'm coming to the currency. Okay. So the point there, again, is the president saying things are going well. Let's be careful. Let's make sure that, we have, in essence, what he's saying that, when you have, when the trend starts to reverse, make sure that you have reserves, right? To put back. Reserves, which is sacrifice. Reserve, which is sacrifice. To set reserves, as in households, as in businesses, is sacrifice, right? So when we create it and the shifts are occurring, then we will have to fall on it, to make sure that, we stabilize the situation, because it's good to stabilize and to sustain reforms. Now, you spoke about revenue.
But revenue being affected, was that a major consideration?
Of course, revenue would have to be.
Import levy was being hit?
Wait a minute. Yes, because our revenue
was that
today
a fact?
is a factor.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, let me illustrate. Our revenue today, right? And I'm talking revenue, not tax revenue. Our revenue today is about 15%, right? 17%.
Okay. Tax GDP ratio?
Yes.
Okay.
The tax GDP ratio is around 15%.
Okay.
The revenue is around 17, 18%. But as a middle income country that we have become, it is our tax to GDP ratio that should be 17%, 18%, even for an African country. It is not 15%. And that is why, we are the president, the minister, and others have spoken about getting technical assistance in order to bring the VAT regime back to where it was. And then the president said it would affect the entire, revenue consideration when the debates were going on. And therefore, the levies that are being imposed, we have had a temporary levy policy where, you have sunset clauses. You use them during austerity and then you remove them. In other words, they are similar to your counter-cyclical measures, when you. Yeah, so let me use a practical example, which is true. When we went into COVID globally, right? You remember that's when Zoom, and telephony and things, hit a boom, right? Therefore, that's when, and because many of these are done through the banking sector, that's when you have your FinSec levy. Because it is not the whole sector that is depressed. There's a sector that is doing well on account of we being at home. And therefore, meetings were being done on the laptop, on the phone, and whatever. It means that sector, is booming. So you put a temporary levy on it, right? You put a temporary levy on it. Of course, a time will come when COVID will be over. And it did, right? And today, yes, there's some stability in the use of Zoom and the other, but it's not at the peak when it was, in a crisis, when they were favorable. So, to summarize again, all that we're saying is that you cannot manage an economy without crisis. You cannot manage an economy continuously for 4 years, 3-4 years, without one crisis or the other, right? Mpox. Mpox is in the news, right? How are we preparing for it? Or how did we prepare for it? Have we put some reserves, learning from COVID, so that when mpox comes, we fall on those reserves, to manage? And that is when the reserves you are keeping, because you will have to tackle it. That's when you take the reserves, right, to manage it. I mean, this is not saying you are manipulating the markets. No, you are only managing the economy because of the ups and downs.
How committed is government to this whole city stability? There are some who have said that, and I stand to be educated and all the rest, that it's because government is not spending, and that is why we're seeing this more of a front-loaded fiscal consolidation. That's why we're seeing the city stabilize. And if we start spending, we'll see things get out of hand. Is that the situation? Is that a situation on the ground that you are squeezing yourselves as government to achieve these results? Is that the truth?
No. Wait a minute. What is spending, right? Didn't we pay some of the debts that was falling due?
Weren't there previous commitment already that was, and so this is not fresh commitment?
No, if it was that easy, it would have been paid. It
Yeah.
wouldn't have been carried forward. If it was that easy, George, we
So
wouldn't.
your government is spending.
I'm saying if it was that easy, we wouldn't
Yeah.
have defaulted.
Defaulted
we wouldn't
past.
have defaulted at
Yeah.
all in the past. If it was that easy, we wouldn't have defaulted.
The government
Are you
is
getting my
spending.
logic?
Yeah.
So we've defaulted. There is liability to be paid. And I'm saying
The
that.
government is
and I'm
spending.
saying
It's not
government
true
is
that
spending.
government is not spending.
Government is spending. But government is also saying that, if you listen carefully to the minister, just because I have to spend, there's no, and you listen to the Cocoa Board boss, just because I have to spend, does not also mean that I should not examine the expenditure. I should not audit the expenditure. Right? I'll be wasting your tax resources if I did that. Knowing very well that some of the expenditure, right? If I can cut off 10% of expenditure which was awarded, fraudulently in some cases as a result of a mistake. Let's take it for
The
granted.
Auditor General is doing an audit. The president says should be done very soon. That would aid the payment of
Remember, it
contractors.
was the minister who commissioned that.
Yeah.
It was cabinet that
And
commissioned that.
are they done? The Auditor General done with their work?
I think you heard it. The minister has said that he's expecting that this June, some of the audits will be completed. And I think he
Then
said
they'll
just
start paying
last
the
week.
contractors.
Yes. Remember I read somewhere where the minister said that he started paying, making payments.
So it is not true
I
that
think
government is not spending.
Even in the discussions on the monuments, I think it was in yesterday or today's newspapers, the minister said that we are paying some emoluments. Despite the impression that we are not, because it's part of the compensation package. But the point I'm making, George, is that if you are doing austerity and you are generating revenue, right, you don't just generate revenue, and then use the money to pay expenditure which needs to be audited. So you have to examine. And I've done many audits. Of course, as an accountant, I've done many audits, right? When I was in office. And the current minister was deputy. He was in charge of the budget and overseeing some of those audits. So he knows very well that, when you are doing austerity, you also have to look at your expenditure. You have to examine them carefully. And we have always done this. We have always done this. That is why every austerity program has revenue as expenditure. It has debt management. It has arrears management. Remember what we are talking about is what leads to the ballooning of arrears. So no, there is nothing cynical. There's nothing, deliberately manipulative about what is being. It's economic.
Government is spending, so it's not true that is why we are not spending.
Government is
that
spending
is why.
and government will spend.
How committed is government to this stability in terms of sticking to the fund program and the other things you need to? Because there are some who are saying that on the monetary side, Dr. Johnson Isiama, he's done his bit. The buck stops with the fiscal in terms of ensuring that this stability that we've seen is sustained throughout.
Let's go to the IMF itself.
No,
I'm answering your question.
Yeah.
I'm answering your question. I'm saying that if you look at the staff report that was released after the fourth review, right? I believe that, you were also in Washington, we were there together, that in the news briefings, it was said that up to 4 minimum indices were being derailed and had to be brought back. Not by the previous administration. They were being derailed under the previous administration, right? And they had to be brought back in order that we satisfy the condition for going to the board.
Typical of an election year, some will say. Dueling of those indicators.
But the correction has to be done. And let me remind you, that it was in an election year in 2016 when we did zero financing. It was in an election year in 2016, when we did 57%, right? It was in an election year when we did 6.1% deficit, right? Back then, probably, it wouldn't have dawned on people, that these were real, achievements. Let's grant it. But then having defaulted and having seen an election year, what 2016 proved was that it is possible to have an election and still have, and mind you, when I say this, people say, oh, okay, but that's why, but mind you, between 2015 and 2016 was when we also did the most infrastructure. we were spending. We were borrowing. We were applying the borrowing to infrastructure. It was during that same period that we did Port expansion. It was during the same period, that we did Terminal 3. It was during that same period that we started Kumasi, Tamale airports and the rest. We did massive infrastructure, including social infrastructure, hospitals, clinics, and the rest. And yet we did not bust the budget. We did not. So what is it that has changed? With 3 oil fields, such that we are in the situation in which we are now, after the buffers. I'm saying that we could have, if we had continued with the measures, which shows that you can manage expenditure in an election year, probably would not have defaulted.
No, but I get from you that for government and for the president committed to fiscal discipline, that would help sustain the city stability. Because the argument
it's
is
not
that...
just the city stability.
Because I just want to consider the city now. The argument is that the backstops to the fiscal, if we want to see this good run being sustained.
Yes, and that's why...
And government is very committed to that fiscal discipline.
Yes, we have to, because that is what will bring us back to B- ratings by the rating agencies. That is what will bring us, back to paying our debt. That is what will bring back, the domestic bond market. And the lesson there is that the next time Ghanaians, and I'm talking about Ghanaians and foreigners, including foreigners, of course, right, buy a government bond, right, be careful. Because if you continue repeating, nobody will patronize the bonds. If not even Ghanaians will patronize the bonds. So when we bring back the domestic bond market, right, the need for a debt repayment, the need for a debt repayment account, right, applies to Ghanaians as to foreigners. Because Ghanaians, for the first time, suffered a haircut. Haircuts which the foreigners who gave us the loan and their taxpayers were the ones who have...
Things are
so
going...
I'm saying that austerity does not have to be a dirty word. Austerity is discipline. I would say that let's be disciplined about how we generate revenue. Let's be disciplined about how we incur expenditure. Let's be disciplined
how you spend.
Because that is the only way in which you remain in both the domestic and external markets that you are able to borrow to do the project.
And you drum that into His Excellency's year about the expenditure bit because of the impact on your local currency.
Why should I take the credit? Why should let me ask you, why should I take the credit? You have a president who was deputy minister during ERP SAP. He was in charge of information, commenting on many of the measures that were being taken. You have a president who, sat, as economic management team. You have a president who, on occasions when the president was not around, chaired cabinet. And you have a president who, spoke about the measures that I'm talking about. He spoke about them, when we were in office, right? Yes, some skepticism, but he spoke about it. So why should I be sitting here, and not be humble to admit that the president understands what he's talking about?
You think that your biggest test, and it's clear, and because we've got that from the president, and I know you might have played a part, that we would not extend the fund program. But the argument is that our biggest test when it comes to fiscal discipline will be the election year.
If you listen to the president carefully, right, this is not new. If you listen to the president carefully...
That we are not going to extend the program, that's a fact.
He didn't end there.
Okay.
He didn't end there. He said, we will use the Article 4. Remember...
Which is open to every member country of the IMF. That is no news, some will say. That if the president says that they will use Article 4, every member country
but he continued.
Would utilize that.
But he continued. He said we will use the Article 4 within the PSI framework, the policy support instrument framework, right? And what the policy support instrument, we can Google it, we can have a conversation. It does is that because you'll be subject to Article 4, which is the same as a fund program, why don't you go homegrown like we went, right? Which we used to negotiate in 2015. Why don't you go homegrown? Why don't you develop your own policies? Why don't you tell the fund that I've developed my policies, come, let us evaluate it, right? And I want to enforce, discipline. We want to be masters of our own destiny. such that when we have problems, we should be able to fall on our reserves and other things, to meet, the distance and stop this, thing that without IMF we cannot manage.
No, but the numbers have shown that the numbers have shown under a fund program, you perform very well.
But we've never done a PSI, George. So let me explain. A PSI simply means, therefore, that on your own, you are going to keep a debt repayment account. On your own, you are going to keep a deficit, between 5 and 6%. Is it not in our Fiscal Responsibility Act? The requirement was in the PF.
We had all those things, Honorable, and we have now gone to the fund more than 17 times. The argument is that we end up doing very well when it comes to the economy under the fund program. What we are seeing right now is because of the IMF program with the economy.
The role of a president, right, as a general, right, is to lead the troops. And he's saying, what he's saying is that let's do what Botswana is doing today. Let's do what Kenya used to do. Let's do what the emerging economies do. Let's do what even mighty United States does, because every member of the IMF, irrespective of whether you are managing well or not, is subject to Article 4. But some countries saying that let us progress to manage this, and I'll give you an example. Let us progress to manage this, on our own, and see whether we can do it on our own. Go under the PSI framework, which means that just like the review visits that the fund, comes to do and other things, they'll be coming at intervals of Article 4 and tell us and release a report. So we will know whether going PSI we are doing well or we are not doing well.
We will see the discipline post and exit fund program in an election year.
I'm saying that
when you see the numbers or the polls not showing that you might retain power.
But George, it may not have been popular at the time. But remember, I just told you that we met or came close to meeting all the indices during 2016 election. Let me remind you, I said deficit was 57%. It wasn't 90%. Sorry, the debt level. Deficit was 6.1%. It wasn't 12 or 15%. Right? We had gone out of the IMF program. At the time, we were achieving all of this based on the continuation of the homegrown program. Sorry, we were in the IMF program, but we had met this condition beyond what was in the fund program, which then the current administration took over with 3 oil fields, should have continued, right? But we are where we are.
We can do our own work post an IMF program.
I think we should have faith in ourselves.
I agree in your principle and your zeal as an individual, but as to whether all your colleagues within government share this view with you, and even some of your members in your party, because again, the data has shown that without a fund program, we've seen what governments in this country have done.
You see, every citizen, let me be modest about this, every citizen who has benefited from this country and has had an exposure, right, such as I have had, doing missions to low-income countries, fragile economies, emerging countries, and particularly the countries that are ceded to the EU, right? I am saying that for some of them, Ghana is better endowed. Ghana has more resources. And some African countries that are doing well now. And therefore, if those countries can do it, let us encourage ourselves that we are able to do it. And I'm not saying this as out of a vacuum, but I'm saying I've been to countries who have less resources than Ghana, and they've been able to do it. I think we should have belief in ourselves. Just as our forefathers, now, and some of our parents, for those who are, let the continent into political independence, and then why can't we lead the continent into, where are the lions? The example I wanted to give was during the global financial crisis. And I've given this example. Portugal for P, Ireland for I, Greece for G, Spain for S, right? The so-called PIGS.
So we can do it.
Remember, no, for the so-called PIGS, which were advanced economies, were forced by their competitors within the EU to go to the fund and to learn fiscal discipline.
France is talking about some engagement to the IMF as well, and we don't know how that structure will be.
The example I'm giving is, let me learn. The example I'm giving is that, yes, they went, but they realized that, wait a minute, We don't belong to this place.
Honorable, we need to take a quick break. I'll be coming back as we engage the economic advisor to President John Mahama, as we talk about the Cedi, the energy sector, and the public sectors and with the wage we're managing it. When we come, I'll be looking at government decision to levy that 1 Ghana cedi on fuel, whether it's a prudent decision, and also managing the organized labor and the impact on the wage bill. This is PM Express Business Edition. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to PM Express Business Edition. We're talking about the stability of the Ghana cedi. We're talking about managing the energy sector debts and also, again, organized labor, public sector wage bill, total compensation. How is government planning to manage all these challenges? Engaging the economic advisor to the President, Honorable Cedi. 1 Ghana cedi levy on a liter of petroleum product. If the 95 pesos couldn't deal with the problems in the energy sector in terms of debt, what would an additional 1 cedi do, Honorable?
The explanation was again offered that the 1 cedi is targeted at a specific goal, which is
buying fuel.
Liquid fuel, yes. You know, and to stabilize it. And secondly, going forward with the general reforms that would come, right? Because it is structural, PURC and PA would have to look at it in terms of the cost structure, in conjunction with the other reforms, involving VAT, involving import duty and the rest, which is a general cleanup to rationalize. And then some of the levies will now have a sunset clause, which has started, and they'll be taken away, right? So I think we should, that's the context. I don't think that the 1 cedi would have come if a hole had not been.
And that hole, the 95 pesos could not address that hole because some would say that.
I think that's what the explanation that was given. That hole is there, and it couldn't address because we were struggling, paying the arrears for which the ESLA had to be extended and arrest, and at the same time buying fuels, to keep the economy. Mind you, if we continue paying the debt as we're doing and we're not buying fuels first, we would have had to either buy on credit and we'll start another arrears spiral, right? Secondly, if that's collapsed because we didn't have the money, because everything is going to be paying, the existing arrears, including the ESLA, arrears that should have been liquidated, which was not liquidated, right? What would happen is that we will get to a screeching halt, more or less, right? Doom so will worsen. And the cost will be more than one.
Isn't it more of, some would say,
the cost will be more than
a PR thing to get Ghanaians to buy into this thing about us, or if you don't pay this thing, what didn't we hear about e-levy? The argument is that it's one of those things that policymakers will try to push to convince us to pay. The argument, if you don't pay, they do so worsen. We didn't have this levy before, and there are some who see that doing so was managed.
George, let's go to the facts. I like to speak about facts. We started ESLA, Energy Sector Levy, as we call it. We started the ESLA. We passed the ESLA law. Just as President Mahama said recently, we are not going to, even though every fund is a consolidated fund, we are not going to go into the general one. So we said we will put it into a fund. And let me remind you that the first flows of ESLA that came in, we used $500 million to pay cash for VRA debts. As a result of the doomsday, the debt that they on their balance sheet, which they had to buy because subsidies were not coming. We brought the banks to the table, right? All the banks to the table. And we injected 500 million Ghana cedis of the first ESLA flows that came in. Then we had a subcommittee comprising Minister of Finance, Minister of Energy on the government side. The same banks, 11 or 13 banks, also brought, in. They did a computation, and we pledged to liquidate the remaining 2.2 million Ghana cedis, billion Ghana cedis of VRA debts after the 500 million. That is what is different. That we started using the ESLA. In fact, we also use that, revenue flow estimate, right, to get a $600 million Afri-Exim term sheet to liquidate, to make a down payment, and to restructure, just as we did with VRA, the balance of IPP debt. What happened to that term sheet? So I think that's the point I'm making, that sometimes we need to go to the facts and not generalize too much to make it look like, if we don't switch the pot, and I don't care if it is the positive or the MPP or whatever, after all, it's competition.
Yes. So say it's yes. Government. I mean, for that person in the rural area, he sees the two of you as government, and that is where the concern is. The person in the rural area goes to vote for NDC or he goes to vote for MPP. And until we start educating them and saying that the government don't have the same policy, one government used 500 million to start paying down the debt, 2.2 to restructure, got a term sheet to pay, which was 100 and was no use, then we'll begin to have the distinction between the performance of the government. ESLA was able to raise 9 billion Ghana cedis last year, right? If I'm right, and I stand to be corrected.
What happened? ESLA has raised enough money to have liquidated.
So why couldn't that be used to pay down the debt?
I think you can address that to the past administration.
But they didn't hand over notes to you, Honorable.
I'm saying that.
So you are in a better position now to say that maybe they didn't use the money for that. They used it for something else.
Exactly. So when they say that, when they are taking credit, for the positive, can you remind them to take credit for the negatives?
The money was not used for what it was supposed to be used.
So can you also hold them responsible?
That is the fact.
Was that a positive? Is that a positive thing for which we are taking credit? They are taking credit. The default. Is that a positive thing to take credit for?
Right? Oh, no, but are we still paying the toll debt? I stand to be corrected. So there's a levy that is dealing with that.
Well, we have the total energy sector debt, which has been quantified and for which, the ESNA has been extended, and the promise is to, gradually do away with them, which is what we started to do. So it is not just, so some of let me repeat, what the Minister for Energy and the Minister for Finance have said is that we are going to look at besides and as I said that we used to have temporary taxes that lapse. So we are going to have this within context of a fund program, within context of our own homegrown 2 program. And when we do the comprehensive fiscal policy reforms, which when I say fiscal policy, I'm talking about revenue like ICOMS, West Blue that we did, plus GIFMIS, which we did, we all know was stopped. When we bring all this together, then we will start enforcing the fiscal discipline on a medium to long-term basis. No longer on a knee-jerk basis, right? And so that is the other element which we should be discussing. We can have another,
The skeptics will look at the toll debt issue and they will be concerned about whether the commitment from a government or a political party in government that we are using this one Cedi to deal with doomsday and deal with the sector debt. They are skeptical because some are saying we've heard it before. We've heard it about levy being our savior to change everything, and what happened? We heard about the toll debt, and the toll debt is still there.
George, whether it's the toll debt, it's the cocoa board debt, which, those are corporate. It's at the macro level, right? Now, whether it is debt owed to China, whether it is debt owed to France, who today have to determine how we go to the board, whether it is debt owed to, Ghanaians who, after suffering a haircut, they had to suspend payments and everything. I'm saying that the issue is that, right, debt is not necessarily bad, right? But when you borrow and you do not have a mechanism for repayment, that is when things go wrong. So just as it is wrong for toll not to have a mechanism for repayment, sometimes it's because subsidy is not paid to them and all that, which has been going away, right? I say it's as wrong as the nation itself also borrowing, and not have a mechanism for repayment.
So, Honorable,
and that is the difference. That's the difference between the two. Don't lump the two.
Okay, I get you. Honorable, so if Ghanaians accept this one cedi levy thing, the commitment I have from government and from you, the president, is that Dumso is going to be a thing of the past, and that's the commitment.
We should strive to minimize the impact of Dumso. One, because today, Saudi reduction of crude oil is helping us. Tomorrow, Saudi's reversal of that policy is going to hurt.
But the commitment is that,
no, I know,
if we pay this thing,
let me tell you
Dumso is not going to happen again.
No, George, let me tell you.
I think that consumers or Ghanaians need that clarity from government.
Yes, and let me give that clarity from my own experience. From my own experience. We did the 2015 budget at a high of $99 per barrel. And we were so hopeful that we'll get money into the sinking fund, the heritage fund, and, pay off, beyond the first sovereign bond, pay off some of the Dumso and other bonds, right? In November, whilst we were reading the budget, crude oil prices fell from $99 to $45, and it kept going down. In March 2016, an election year, we had to go back to Parliament, if you remember, and cut expenditure, including e-school, e-blocks, and others. Right? So I'm saying that you are not in control of all the factors that affect the economy. And therefore, let me make this, very strong point that as a country, we should adopt counter-cyclical measures, as I explained. And when the times are good, let's put some of the goodies aside, so that when the times turn sour, we can fall on them, right? It's like the way, as employees, when you get your bonus, and I know multimedia pays nice bonus. You put some aside, right? I've had a long association with multimedia.
Okay, don't worry, but
you put some aside, because your son will go and play.
Okay.
He will go and play with other kids who have kata and what are not for their own fault, and they will infect each other, and they will come home. You have to take them to. If you chop all the money, what are you going to do?
Oh no, but we've had several reforms in the tax space, and especially with regard to the VAT, that we understand that the president says that the reforms are going on. And for our viewers, I know you have a book on VAT in Africa, Ghana, experience that you put together in terms of all your experience that you've done in the VAT space. With all the reforms that has happened when it comes to VAT, we are still struggling, one, even understanding the VAT itself. And revenue mobilization is still a big challenge. Even for the IMF now to come in and try to help us with the new reforms taking place or being implemented in September this year.
George, I've made this point always. The pillar for our tax system rests on 4 taxes. Income tax, everybody pays, unless the law exempts you.
The president doesn't pay? Yeah.
That's the law.
Okay,
That's
sorry. There's a better way. No, sorry.
Yes. 2, the presidents have too much headache to 2. The second one, and that is a general tax on income. The second equivalent, the flip side, is a general tax on expenditure, which everybody should pay unless the law exempts you, and that is VAT. These 2 are the broadest tax base that we have. But in addition, we have 2 other ones which also have a broad base, right? But they are discriminatory. Excise duty. You don't drink, you don't smoke, you don't take throttle, you don't pay excise duty.
Okay.
Right? Then we have import duty. We want to protect our local industries. So it's only when you import, a commodity like this cell phone that you pay. If this cell phone were manufactured in Ghana, there will be no import duty. Assuming we got all the parts, we advance your point, right? These are the 4. We should let them remain intact, their structure. So VAT says everybody should pay 17.5%. For one reason, because of the difficulty in introducing VAT, to increase it from 10% to 12.5%, we said get fund. It's a VAT, but we said let us apply the resources to education. To increase it from 12.5% to 15%, we said national health insurance. To increase it from 15% to 17%, we said Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund, so that we can continue the infrastructure. They are levies, but they are not levies in the ordinary sense. They are VAT. And the only reason is that we have ring-fenced it as statutory funds for specific sectors of the economy. But they were being collected as VAT. Why do we take them out, 2 of them, right, and turn them into a levy? And the effect of doing that is that when the health insurance or GET fund is part of VAT, you get credit and you get refund as a business. When you take it out, right, you don't get a credit, you don't get a refund, but you have to add them as levy to the cost, which you were not doing previously.
It's complicating matter. That is why we are struggling
and I'm saying that
to get our revenue targets.
That's what.
And we have to go through a reform.
That's what the book.
And that's what this book is actually going.
It's saying that keep it clean, keep it simple and clean, and that's the recommendation.
And is the assurance that the reforms that are ongoing right now would ensure that the revised VAT laws will be very simple for businesses?
No, let me put it another way. We have introduced, and you can check the numbers. You can let your staff check them. We can come and talk about it. We have introduced levies. Some say 13, some say 15, some say even say 20 plus, right? George, I'm saying that from when we started introducing the levies, right, the tax to GDP ratio, right, remained flat. Why? Because if you're adding all these levies to cost, and there will be evasion, there will be avoidance. So we're not generating revenue.
And that's what the problem is.
That's what the problem is. So go back and keep it simple.
And that was honorable. Let me.
And you generate the same, or more money by making the tax easier to comply with and easier to administer.
Let me come to organized labor. And the argument has always been that when it comes to getting what is due them, government drags its feet. And that is why now the minister is saying that, if we hit to the concerns of the nurses, it will be additional 2 billion Ghana cedis on the wage bill. Why should that be a problem when this thing was negotiated way before the preparation of the budget? And the argument is that when it comes to workers getting their due, we have excuses.
George, let me plead that we are at a very delicate stage of discussions, with labor on this matter. And I wouldn't want to make comments which, would be at the risk of being, misinterpreted. We can come back, later when there is some quiet for us to discuss it. Except to say that these issues that we're talking about, right, we should pluck some lessons also from the single spine era. The fact that some of the allowances were actually subsumed in the single spine, right? So we should have policy consistency, right, in the things that we do. So let me just stop at this, going back into history and looking at our wage policy, which together with interest, 65% more or more. You will never have enough for capital and for other, expenditures. But I think I would just like to pause here, just because I think a truce has been called nationwide.
And what do you make of that? And the indication is that they are likely to announce decision for your government.
Well, it's good for a nation to have that. We've always agreed with, talking from government side, with labor, we've always had this situation, But I think what I heard from the news was that even our friends on the labor side were not commenting in full to allow, not to inflame. They were not commenting. Government side was also not commenting in full. And I think it's only prudent that we allow, we all respect whatever agreement they've agreed, that let's not go public to inflame. So maybe after the agreement.
The IMF held a press conference today. They said that all other things being equal, in the first week of July, they will take the fourth review to the board. What we've picked up from the funding DC is that I mean, that program will be approved.
No.
I
Taking
mean,
it
for you,
to the board
itself,
is a plus.
So for you, what do you make of this development as well, that they are going to look at the program in the first week of July? And what we've picked up from Washington, D.C. is that the program will be approved.
So let us continue to the 5th review and do it well. I think there are 6 reviews, right?
Yeah.
Let us go to the 6th review, April. And as the president said, let us, and it will be my wish that Ghanaians, devise their own homegrown policy for resolving, our problems. Such that, as the president said, let's begin. We are not going to be defiant and say no. What the president says is that countries are adopting the PSI as a step. Right, so let us adopt the PSI. Let's involve the fund. After all, we are members of the fund, so that it should only be in the most critical of situations, like global crisis.
Some will say that it would aid in the confidence building of the economy when the board should approve the money for it to come you on track and all those things.
George, me and you, weren't our parents, happy? They got some relief, but when they're happy, the first day you came to tell them that you had a job.
Just a little bit of
that you had a job with
In 30 seconds, the fund is also saying that because of the way the Cedi has appreciated, they could be revising some of the target because of the impact on the program as well. That should come out good news for you as well, in terms of, because you're looking at net GDP ratio, the timelines, you are meeting all those targets even before the program ends.
I would say that all of Ghanaians should be proud about that, right? That we have come this far. Ghanaians should therefore, we should commit and therefore begin to think that maybe this thing about controlling our own destiny is feasible.
They're giving you thumbs up to your levy as well. The fund think that it's a good thing.
Because we have explained that it's to resolve a problem. I can assure you that, the fund is not normally happy with increases.
But this book in 30 seconds, where are we going to get a copy? What is it? I mean, basically, when is it? Just in 30 seconds.
The launch is 25th, so you are invited.
And to get a deeper understanding of the VAT issues, right?
Yes, and especially I dedicate it to my students because I do teach as well. So,
the Premier
I think that's
University.
really
The Premier University, of course. University of Ghana, Lagos. And that is how we draw the curtain down on PM.
I'm Kivas, right?
Oh, okay, I know. But you teach at Lagos.
Bachelor of Commerce.
Okay.
I teach in many places.
Okay. And that's how we draw the curtain down on PM Express Business Edition, engaging the economic advisor to President John Mahama, talking about the economy, the Ghana Cedi, the labor issues, and then the taxes. I know the debate will go on in your homes and offices about how can we better manage the situation. My name is George Wiafe. It's been PM Express Business Edition. Have a great day.